And with that, we should be live and in color from Palo Alto, California, on the corner of the street, looking out at the neighbors. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may happen to be. Tad here. I'm going to be reading and generally hanging out. Hope you're well today. Hope whatever part of the country you are not in too massive a weather hole. Although I know from checking in online that a lot of you are, that there's a lot of really miserable stuff going on. A lot of very hot people, a lot of very humid people. Those of you in other countries, I'm sure it's true there as well. I'm not meaning to ignore. I'm not meaning to be an American exceptionalist or anything like that. It's bad wherever it happens, and people are people wherever they may be. So anyway, hope you're okay. We are having, I can't even really bother to mention it because the weather here is pretty normal right at the moment. I keep fingers crossed. But anyway, so we are just moving forward. As I mentioned last night, I am going to be going out of town from approximately the 10th to the 24th. And while I haven't looked that up yet, I could look that up right now and see what September looks like. There we go. Okay, so that is Sunday and through Sunday. So that's minimum 2 weeks, probably 3 weeks that I am not going to be able to read. So just to let you know that. So from the 10th to the 24th, which unfortunately covers 2 Sundays. And since I do my reading on Sundays, and since I'll be traveling on both of those, the 10th and the 24th, I don't want to promise anything to anybody and then disappoint or relieve for those of you who are like, God, please get rid of this guy. Anyway, so yeah, so from the 10th to the 24th, Deborah and I will be going to England to see family and friends and just a little bit of the old sod. Well, no, that's usually Ireland, what that we call the old sod. But anyway, a little bit, and we won't make it to Ireland this time, unfortunately. But we will be running around and seeing folks, and Deb in particular hasn't been for, God, like 8, 9, 10 years, I think. It's been a long time anyway. And I haven't been there for very long either. No, maybe we had one. And it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. God, please shut up, Tad. That's what's going on. And as a result, I'm letting you know now. So those of you who want to can make other plans to find more interesting people to listen to, perhaps, or to go and interact with the world in a more practical or amusing way. So that's where we are at. Let me think. What else going on? I'm kind of in the middle of a bunch of stuff. As I mentioned, I'm working on the third Ordinary Farm book, which is Deb did a very good, very thorough first draft. But as I've looked at it since then, me, being the picky OCD kind of guy that I am, I've seen a bunch of things that I need to change. So that's going to be some work. And then after that, I'm planning to start The Splintered Sun, which will be another Ostenard book, but set in a completely different era, several hundred years before all of the Dragonbone Chair stuff begins. And it will be a short novel, I think, what I call short, like single volume. And if I have my way, if people enjoy it, if people like it, I would like to write more novels set in that particular part of the Ostenard universe. We shall see. What other things I may do, I don't know. A lot of it just depends on what's going on with me, my publishers, the readers, what people want, what people don't want, whatever the case may be. One of the interesting things about being a professional writer is you, to a certain extent, or a professional, by professional, I don't mean simply that you can sell a book to a publisher. That's one definition of professional writer, and a perfectly good one, by the way. But by professional, I mean that's what I do for a living. And one of the things that, having committed to writing full time and making all of my living from writing, is that I, in essence, give up a bit of my freedom in return for a market. And as a result, there are many things, many experimental or just odd, weird projects that catch my eye or that tickle my brain that have to get put aside because every time you do something different, you lose a certain amount of audience. You hope you gain some audience too, but you lose a certain amount. So even though I loved the Bobby Dollar books, basically they didn't. I don't think we sold enough of them compared to what we sell of the big epic fantasies for me to be able to continue doing them, although I very much would like to. I really enjoyed the character and the setting, and I have another novel in mind, so we shall see what we shall see as to whether there will be more Bobby Dollar. But people oftentimes ask, are you going to do more of this or that? I've had queries over the years about, are you going to do another Tail Chaser song? Are you going to do another War of the Flowers? And a lot of this is not really up to me per se, although I will never write anything unless I have a story to go with it. I don't set out and go, I'm going to write a such and such kind of book. It's the story comes to me and I want to tell the story. Excuse me, I have explained, I know, at an earlier stage how the current Ostenard books came to be written. And it was, in fact, from a conversation with Deborah, my wife and business partner, as to why I couldn't write another Ostenard book, because I didn't have an inspiration and I wasn't going to try to write something without having the story idea already there and bubbling up inside me. And then that process led to me sitting around thinking in a rebuttal sense of all the reasons why I couldn't do it, and coming up with one of them being, well, I'm a completely different person than I was when I wrote that first book 30 years ago. And then realizing that was an interesting thing in and of itself, like what would happen to the characters over 30 years and the Witchwood Crown and this whole group, including what I'm reading from now, The Brothers of the Wind. All of that sprung from that idea. So for me, the ideas, the plots, the stories have to come first. And anyway, to get back to the original point, I also have to be aware of the fact that I have a family. I have a house. I have dogs, expensive dogs who want to be fed every single darn day. They're crazy. And a cat that needs to be fed too. So, and at the moment, we have several kids living on in several properties that we are responsible for, despite their having already reached the age of adulthood. So, as a result, I don't have the freedom to choose projects that I would if, say, I were, a single guy living in a garret somewhere, in the traditional garret, and writing what I wanted to write and only what I wanted to write, and following my most experimental impulses, and et cetera, et cetera. So either you can call me a coward if you want to, but I do put the safety and health of having a family with a roof over their heads and all that stuff first, and that tends to militate toward writing things that the audience is already looking for. In my case, namely fantasy. As opposed to urban fantasy, science fiction, horror, mainstream. I happily write mainstream fiction. I'd happily write historical fiction. I've had ideas for all these things. But you write what you can, and one of the things that you do is you make sure that you will at least have a good chance of writing a book that people will buy. Excuse me. I think I'm coming down with something minor, but something. Anyway, not of interest. So with that, I am going to see who is here and who has checked in and who would be willing to be said hello to. basically. So let me do that. And what I've got here, right off the bat, I've got Angie. Hello, Angie. That's Angie Paget. Tracy McClatchy. Hello. Good to see you. Kristen. A pleasure, Kristen. Emily. Hello, Emily. Isaac. My friend Isaac. Good to see you. Joy Higginbottom. Hello, Joy. How are you? Nice to have you with me. Ray Weatherford. The indefatigable Ray Weatherford. Good to see you, Ray. Eric Beazle. Or Beisel, depending on how one pronounced it. I don't know, since I think you may be new, or at least new to having your name on here. So I apologize for any mistakes, and good to see you. Thank you for joining me. Who else? Barban. Hello, Barban. Good to see you. Ray, the irresistible Ray Riddle. Hello, Ray. Good to see you. Claudia, my friend. Good to see you. Kelly. Hello, Kelly. And Jack Barucha. Hello, Jack. I see there's a question. I'd love to hear more from the characters introduced in the Witchwood Crown, assuming you don't blow up Ostenard at the end of The Navigator's Children. I'll come back to that in a second. Let me just get the rest of the people to say hello before they disappear. Carl Dersham, hello. Susan Shamblin, nice to have you. Yaza Majeski or Majeski, a pleasure. I think I asked you once how I should pronounce that, and I don't know if I ever saw the reply. And Tiffany Perry, hello, good to see you. So Jack just asked about whether I'm going to blow up Ostenard. First off, I don't tend to do that sort of thing. I don't think it was meant too seriously, but there were times, especially during the writing of the first trilogy, when I got to the 7th year and I was laboring to finish it, and I was going through separation and divorce, and I was living in a horrible little rented room that was full of fleas because the landlord's cat wandered in and left flea eggs or something, and it was horrible. Anyway, I remember several points during that particular part of my life back in 1991 or so, where I definitely considered, just writing the sentence, and then a giant haywain jumped the jumped the sidewalk and killed them all at the end. And in fact, my friend at the time, Mark Craigbaum, said, yeah, you should just kill everybody off at the end suddenly without explanation, and it'll be really postmodern. And I said, yes, it will be postmodern, and so will be my execution at the hands of the readers who have spent 6 years waiting for the end of this story. They will track me down and they will kill me. So I didn't do that, tempted as I was. But anyway, so that's where we're at, and I will definitely, one of the interesting things, one last thing before I start reading, one of the really interesting things for me about this whole process of going back to Ostenard is that it has meant not just writing a new story, but adding on a great deal of history and interstitial information that was not visible before, but now it comes out because of various new things that happen, and really exploring some of the details and some of the characters. And say, for instance, we will in The Navigator's Children learn the origins of a character that the readers know very well, but not much is known about their origin. And we are going to learn some surprising things about some other characters as well that were not heretofore known. So it's been really interesting approaching this with that idea in mind, that I am not merely telling a story per se, but that I am opening up more of the world that Ostenard represents. And that means the history of it and the backgrounds of lots of characters and more explanations about the way things work, of which the last volume, The Navigator's Children, is pretty chock full of such things, as is often the case with final volumes, where you can finally reveal the secrets you've been hiding. So that's been actually one of the things that has made me more willing to go back to Ostenard, is that I am now even more fully invested than I was after writing the first trilogy. I use the word trilogy, as always, advisedly. But I'm now even deeper into the thing and into the history of the place, and have checked in at several different points. So I probably won't blow up Ostenard. That's the simple version of what I was trying to say. I will probably continue as long as I am compos mentis. The brain is working. I will continue to look at it and think about it and write things about it. My only hope is that I also have time to write other stuff as well. Not that I do not love the Ostenard books. I really enjoyed writing them, but that there's other stories I like telling, and I would like to find a chance to tell them. And, I mean, I'm not that old. I'm sure I'd like to think I have another good 15, 20 years of writing left. But one never knows. And the lessons of this year, for me anyway, is never take anything for granted. So I will continue to try and provide for my family, but I will also, when I can, I will try to provide for Tad and Tad's need to occasionally do something unexpected or different. Just because that's what I like. I like to follow new paths and try new things, as long as they're not seafood. But that's another story. Anyway, so I'm going to continue. So where we were when I was reading last night is Hakatri and our narrator, Pamon Kes. Remember, Hakatri is Sithi and Pamon Kes is Tanuka Daya, also sometimes known as changelings. And Pamon Kes and Hakatri are now down to just the two of them as they pursue some kind of solution to the terrible pain and suffering, and also the crazy dreams and stuff that Hakatri has. And of course, the reason for this is that the blood from the dragon that splashed him, as was true to a much lesser extent with Simon in the end of the Dragon Bone Chair and then throughout the rest of those books, the blood is more than blood. It is something that has changed him in some ways and has kind of opened him up and exposed him to things that he was not in contact with before. This is Hakatri I'm talking about. But it's also horribly painful. All the Sithi who have studied him have said they don't know anybody who was as badly burned by dragon's blood as Hakatri, who lived through it. So he's in kind of unknown territory. Anyway, they are trekking back across the grasslands of what would be called the Thrivings in the later books. And as they head north, Hakatri is also driven by a dream that he originally had on the ocean off the coast of Naban, but remains very, very powerful and is dragging him on towards something, a white something. Sometimes it seems like a woman, a white clothed female. Other times it seems like a finger held up in warning. He doesn't know what it is. It keeps showing up in his dreams, and feels as though he is being called to something. And Pamon Kes, of course, his loyal servant and armiger, squire, goes along no matter what, because of his deep debt of what he feels is his debt of honor to Hakatri for having honored him and raised him above other Tanuka Daya. Anyway, so at the very end of last night's reading, Pamon woke up in the middle of the night feeling as though he was on fire, feeling physically as though he was on fire and in horrible pain. And Hakatri apologized to him. And although at that moment Pamon Kes did not understand why Hakatri would be apologizing to Pamon Kes for Pamon Kes having a terrible dream, a horrible, painful, frightening dream. And that's where we're starting the next section after that. That was not the last time I seemed to partake of one of my master's dreams. Often, in the days that followed, I would awaken from fearful visions to discover Lord Hakatri writhing in nightmares of his own, and I became more and more convinced that I was sharing something of his night torments, though I could not understand how. But it was not only those terrible dreams of burning that plagued me. Sometimes, especially on the edges of sleep, I seemed not to be dreaming at all, but to have slipped past the veil that surrounds all our lives and into something quite different, something eternal and unknowable. It was a fearful thing indeed to sense how little separated our waking selves from unknown gulfs of madness. I awakened early one morning to find Hakatri up and moving around our camp. He was packing up our possessions in a sort of fever, as though preparing to flee some danger, but he seemed more excited than worried. "Up, Pamon, up!" he said as I sat rubbing my eyes. "I know our direction at last. I know what the White Phantom is." "And will you tell me, my lord?" I asked. "I will do better. I will show you. To horse! It waits for me." I dutifully gathered up the remains of my cooking tools and the few other things I had taken from my saddlebags and prepared to ride. I had no sooner climbed into my saddle than Hakatri put heels to his mount and was off, and I had to ride boots hard to keep my master in sight. The morning mist swirled between us as we rode, and at times I felt as though I rode alone, chasing something far less substantial than a lord of Azua. The sun had almost reached noon, and the mist had burned away when Hakatri reached the top of a low hill and reined up, calling back to me, "There, Pamon! Did I not tell you?" His voice was full of joy, so much so that it troubled me. Whatever he had found had been leading us on for many days, and I felt only apprehension as I hurried to catch up, a feeling that increased when I reached his side. The meadowland stretched before us like a serving platter, but for the first time I could make out the dim shadow of the great Old Heart forest that girdled the grassland's northern edge, and I was surprised by how far we had come in just the last few days' riding. But I was even more astonished by the angular shape that loomed far above the swaying grasses. A slender hillock of rock and earth that did indeed look a little like a figure dressed in pale robes, but no person, giant, or even dragon had ever stood so tall. The tor jutted high into the sky before us, an angular prominence jutting from the earth like the lower half of a column, though its sides and crest were shrouded in grass and thick with trees. It rose out of a shallow lake that surrounded it like a moat, but it was no castle, and no mortal or immortal hands had shaped it. In truth, the hilly spire before us looked more than anything else to me like the blunt end of a massive skeletal finger, and I shuddered to see it. "What is this place?" I cried. "Sesuadra," called my master, "the leave-taking stone." I had never seen that hill before, but I knew its story as well as I knew of the flight from the garden or the death of Nenaisu. Many, many great years before, the two clans of my master's people, Zidaya and Hikidaya, had met atop the leave-taking stone to arrange their separation, a moment known ever since as the parting. Afterward, Utuku had led her people back to Nakiga to shelter in the mountain's fastness, declaring they would never live with Genjiana and her clansfolk again. After Sesuadra, nothing had ever been the same for the immortals who came from the garden. "But why are we here, master?" I asked. "Surely the place is empty." "Of people, yes," he said, spurring his horse down the slope toward the great pillar of stone and earth. "But it was always alive, and it calls to me." And with that he gave Gray his heels again, forcing me to drive my own horse to a gallop, simply to keep him in sight. Our mounts picked their way through the shallow water at the base of Sesuadra with exaggerated caution. It did not take my years of experience in Azua's stables to see that these horses reared in mortal lands did not like the leave-taking stone. They took every step as though under the eye of a large and lightly sleeping beast of prey. Nor did I think much of the place either. The tales of the parting do not speak often of Sesuadra itself, but it is unlike any other spot I have visited in my life, huge but deserted, its very size making it seem like something unnatural that had been set down in that empty land and then forgotten. "I see the remains of the causeway," Hakatri called to me. "This way, Pamon. We can follow it to the stone itself, and our horses will barely get their bellies damp." His good humor worried me as much as his bad dreams and pained suffering had in the days before, and I could not help wondering, aloud, why this place had become so important to him. "Because I have seen it in so many dreams," he told me. "The very dreams that are part of my affliction." "But is that not a reason to stay away?" I asked. "We are but a day's ride west from the walls of Enkie Shaosaye. We have been in the saddle for almost 2 moons. You have suffered so much, my lord, and we are both weary. Hungry, too, and the roots Hurma gave us to soothe your wounds are all used up. Let us turn toward home instead, or toward Enkie Shaosaye. In the summer city we can rest and strengthen ourselves. Then, if you still wish it, we can come here again on our way back to Azua." Poor foolish Kess. I still believed at that point that after many moons of travel, we would be home within a few days. Hakatri only shook his head as though I failed to understand some elementary fact. "But we are here, Pamon. The leave-taking stone has called to me in my cursed dreams for so long. How could I turn away now?" The spiral track that wound upward around the great stony hill was wide enough for 2 wagons to pass each other. As we rode, Hakatri told me more of the place. I cannot say it made me any less uneasy. "This hill itself is a kind of witness," he said. "There is power here, a power that even the wisest of my people have never entirely understood." "Do you mean this great rock is a master witness? I thought there were only 9 of those, all told, one for each of the great cities, like the pool of 3 depths at home in Azua." The word home was beginning to have an ashy taste on my lips. Many times since we had set out to travel to Nakiga, I had feared my master would never see his family again, that I would have to bear the news of his death back to his mother, Amarasu, and his wife, Briseu. More recently, I had begun to hope that my fears had been wrong, that we might actually find our way back. But now, suddenly, things had changed again. "You already know there is more than one kind of witness," Hakatri told me as our horses leaned forward into the steep track. "Those like the one I carry." He reached into his tunic and produced the mirror he had acquired after losing his first in Serpent's Vale. "And the master witnesses you have seen, like Azua's pool or Mezutua's shard, which can command the lesser witnesses or speak to many witnesses at once. But another sort of master witness also exists, and one of them is here at Seswadra. It is in the stone itself, or perhaps deep in the earth beneath it. No one knows. Its full strength cannot be mastered even by the adepts of my people, but it enhances the power of other witnesses, sometimes in ways even the other master witnesses cannot match. The thing hidden beneath The thing hidden beneath us is called Rauye Saman, the earth drake's eye. Its power is why this place was chosen for the ritual of the parting, to bind the fateful agreement with words of power. All the other master witnesses have long been claimed by Zidaya or Hikidaya, but the witness buried here belongs to no one. Listening, I struggled with worry and even a little anger. But that still does not explain why we are here, and why you are so determined to ride to the top of this stony hill, my lord. Can you tell me that?" "No, Pamon, I cannot, because I do not know. But I do know that I was summoned. I was meant to come here." He said it as though that should lay my fears to rest. But who or what is summoning you? I wondered. I had not believed things could be worse for my master than what he had already suffered, but In that isolated, eerie place, with the wind moaning through the empty grasslands below and rippling the shallow waters around the base of the great stone, I feared for the first time that the worst might be ahead of us. My master's people have a favored saying, part of a long poem by Benhaya of Kementari. First the ocean, then the island. First the forest, then the tree. First the tree, then the branch, then the nightingale. But in the nightingale's song is everything. I will tell the truth, I do not well understand what it signifies. The Zidaya often recite it when they mean to say that some things cannot be understood in part, but only as a piece of a greater whole. But Nightingale was also the name my master's folk called Gengiana, the most beloved of all the Saonsere who came to this land after the flight from the garden, still remembered long after her death for her beauty and goodness. Gengiana, or so it is said, was born with hair that was not white, as with the rest of her kind, but black as a starless night. And instead of the warm golden skin most of her people had, Gengiana's was a pale, buttery shade like the blossom of a spring primrose. The tallest tower in Azua is topped with a statue of her, staring back toward the east. Some say toward the garden itself. Others say to the city of Tumitai, which was swallowed by ice during Gengiana's long lifetime. In many ways, that statue is the symbol of the Zidaya in this land. So I know the nightingale is more than just a bird for my master's people. I was still pondering Benhaya's poem as we reached the top of the leave-taking stone. What had at first seemed merely a huge outcrop in the middle of the grasslands had become a steep, spiraling slope. But as the track broadened at the top and we rode out onto Sesuadra's heights, the place appeared to be something else entirely. An island floating in the sky. The ruins atop the great stone were now revealed to us in all their forgotten splendor. My first impression was of an entire deserted city, with roofless buildings and open stretches of tile that had sunk into the soil in some spots, but had been thrown down in others by the vegetation growing up through it. After a few moments of open-mouthed staring, though, I could see that the deserted site was too small to be a true city, but that its buildings were too large to belong to some lesser settlement. The realization settled on me that all this must have been built simply for the great and terrible ceremony of parting, then abandoned once more. Yes, Pamon, my master said, misreading me for once. Your people labored hard to build all this. No one else could be trusted to do so in a place of such power, but the garden is strong in the blood of your folk. I was so busy looking around me that I did not really grasp what he said, but later I wished I had asked him what he meant. Even now, I wonder how many things that are still great mysteries to me are known and barely considered by my master's people. I do not much like this place, my lord, I said. You can feel it is alive, that is all. His feverish mood seemed to be returning, or at least that something is waiting here to be awakened. You make me dislike it even more, my lord. Hakatru was scarcely paying attention to me now. His eyes had lit on the largest building on the promontory, less decrepit than most of the others. It was round as a barrel's lid and a furlong or more across, with an odd, shallow dome. That is the Kosaajika, he said, the crossroad, as my ancestors named it. I stared at the weird structure. Crossroad? Why should it be called such a thing, my lord? I do not even see one road, let alone a crossing. The whole of its name was the crossroad of time, he said, and with that still hanging in the air, he rode toward it. I followed more slowly. Moss clung to the dome's pearly stone in many places, and grasses and other greenery had crept far up its sides. I thought I could now sense what my master had meant by the place being alive, and it frightened me. I could feel it in the way someone lying in the sun might feel a shadow cross his body. But this shadow fell on me and remained. If Hakatri felt anything like that, though, it did not slow him. He dismounted and passed swiftly through the empty socket where the doors had once stood. I still hesitated just outside the entrance, watching as my master continued to the shadowed center of the low, round central chamber, still holding his witness. After a moment, Hakatri sank to his knees, lifted the mirror in his upturned palms as if he had scooped a drink of water out of a stream, then bent to look into it. Suddenly, full of alarm, I hurried across the uneven tiled floor to his side, but he gestured for me to stay back. As I said, I do not know what will happen. He was staring into his witness, which already seemed alive with shimmering light. Do not come too close, Pamon, and in no circumstance should you touch me. I do not want you harmed by any of this. Despite my growing fear, I almost laughed in pained surprise at his words. My lord did not want me harmed, as if his great suffering had not harmed me already, simply because I loved him. And now Hakatri's visions had even begun to spill over into my own dreams, burning me without ever leaving a mark, terrifying me with things I could not understand. It was far too late to save me from harm. Why have I been called here? Hakatri asked as he stared into the witness. Who calls me? Do you offer a cure or another curse? And then, as I looked on, an even more curious thing happened. The distant walls of the domed crossroad seemed to shrink inward around me. My view grew narrower and narrower, darkness pushing in on all sides, but I guessed I must be seeing with Hakatri's eyes instead of my own, because the gleaming circle of the witness grew before me until I could make out nothing else. The reflection was like a cloudy sky at midday, full of roiling gray, with beams of light here and there, piercing the murk for a moment before disappearing again. Then, suddenly, I fell forward into that whirl of shine and shadow. A small figure gradually formed out of the chaos, cloaked, hooded, but also tenuous as smoke. I could make out little of the face, but it spoke with what sounded like a woman's voice. Finally, through all the years, I have found you. I heard her not with my ears, but in my thoughts. Are you the one who called me here? The voiceless reply seemed to come from me, but the words were my master's, not my own. I could feel Hakatri's pain now, as I sometimes did in my dreams. It grew worse by the moment and made it hard for me to listen and to understand. No, the voice told us. Something greater and subtler than I am has drawn you here, but I have gambled much that you would answer the call. The hour has come, not here, not now, and not for you, but for everything else. All is balanced, but in a mere moment that balance will tip. But why have I been summoned? My master asked. Will you tell me? Is there some reason for my suffering after all? The dim figure made a gesture of negation. Do not ask questions, I beg you. Our moment is short. You are the one who burns. That is the truth, and it is beyond me to change it. I cannot bring you surcease of pain, Hakatri Isaonsere, or even explanation. Suffering simply is. It is what happens despite it that matters. Growing dread clawed at my thoughts, or at my master's thoughts. It was impossible to tell, threatening to tear them into rags. The Kosajika, or the witness, or both, seemed to be making the pain worse. That means nothing. This torment is all I know. There is no help for that. Be silent, please. The female voice balanced both sorrow and impatience. I felt my master's sudden despair. We would find no help here for our suffering. Speak, then, he said. I said, speak and be cursed. That is entirely possible. The pale figure spread its arms and began to smolder like a coal blown back into life, and the darkness narrowed around it. I bring you no prophecy, but a memory that has not yet come to be. There will come a moment when only you, Hakatri of the year dancers, stand between life and darkness. In that moment you must remember this, and you will have to choose. Choose? What choice do you mean? There are no words I can give you to help you understand. The choice has not yet been offered. It may never be offered. But when it is, and somewhere, sometime, it must be, it will be, you must remember this moment. Choose carefully. And now my time is over. But wait, I still do not understand. My master's thoughts were desperate, confused. Choose what? And who are you? Who I am is not important. The smoldering light was beginning to dim. You will know me when we meet again. If we meet again. The light guttered like a candle in a strong breeze. When we meet again. No! Come back! Do not leave me with so little. Those are the last words I remember. I struggled up, at last, from a deeper blackness than I think I have ever known. I lay sprawled on the crossroad flagstones, staring at the dome above my head. The cracks beneath its stones gleamed with sunshine as bright as lightning. For several breathless moments I simply remained there, confused, heart speeding. Then I thought of my master and clambered to my feet. Hakatri lay stretched on the uneven floor a short distance away from me, face down and motionless. Terrified, I did my best to rouse him, but except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest, he seemed lifeless, and his skin was cold. His witness, which had fallen to the tiles, felt no warmer or livelier when I picked it up. No matter how I tried, I could not rouse my master back to wakefulness. And at last I put my arms around his chest and pulled him, his feet dragging toward the empty doorway and out into the fading afternoon sunlight. I managed with an effort I did not think myself capable of to heave him up at last and drape him over the saddle of his restive horse. My own head felt like a drum that had been beaten and beaten until the stretched skin had split, and I could think only of getting Hakatri away from that place. As I rode down the winding track from the hilltop, leading my master's horse and its insensible burden, I was terrified that those moments in the crossroad of time, fearful as they had been for me, might have dealt Hakatri some mortal blow. I needed to find help for him as quickly as possible, but Azua was several days' ride away. When our horses' hooves finally touched the waters of the lake around Seswadra's foot, I turned east toward Enkiaishausaye instead, which was only a few hours distant. Evening had now fallen. I would have to ride in the dark. The grassland along the edge of the Old Heart was a dangerous place stalked by wolves, bears, and mortal bandits, and the forest itself was home to other dangers, but I dared not waste time waiting for the safety of sunlight. I had a dark and uneasy night's ride. I had to stop frequently to push my master back into place so he would not slide off the saddle, and I was no longer riding one of our sure-footed, clear-seeing Zediah mounts. Our progress seemed achingly slow, and my only moment of relief happened near middle night when I heard my master groan. He did not wake, but at least I knew he still lived. The short ride seemed to last for days, not hours, but at last the ancient city appeared out of the forest shadows, its walls agleam with lamps. A small company rode out of the gate to meet us, most carrying torches. In those days, the summer city did not receive many visitors, so even in darkness we had been spotted from a great distance. When the riders were upon us, I recognized Minasau Redwing as the leader of the welcoming procession, or at least I hoped that's what it was, by his famed helmet with its widespread wings, and his hair dyed the purple of flowering betony. Minasau is the protector of Enkiei Shaoseye, child of the city's chief celebrant, Lady Sonayatu, both of whom are among year dancing house's most trusted allies. "Hail, stranger!" Minasau called as we approached. "Are you friend or foe to the summer city? And who do you carry? Is he dead or wounded?" "I bring Lord Hakatri of Azua. He is alive, but he sorely needs a healer." I spoke more straightforwardly than I might have in other circumstances. Nursing Hakatri for so many moons had made me impatient of polite ceremony, especially when it kept my master from help. As I expected, Minasau and the other riders looked at me with surprise, only realizing at that moment that Hakatri's companion was a Tunukadaya servant, and an overbold servant at that. "That is Hakatri of the Sansere?" the protector asked. "Have you two been attacked?" "You will have heard that my master slew the black dragon Hirohebi," I said, "and likely that he was badly scalded with the dragon's blood as well. He has been in search of healing and pain ease ever since. We climbed High Sesuadra at my lord Hakatri's insistence. When he used his witness in the place he called the crossroads, some dire force I do not understand struck him down. Helping him was beyond my skills, so I brought him here." Minasau Redwing showed his good sense immediately. He bade one of his followers mount behind my master and hold him safe in the saddle. Then he sent another back to Enkiei Shaoseye in haste to prepare a bed for my master and to summon healers. "Can he speak?" Minasau asked me. "He has said nothing at all since Sesuadra. He walked the most frightening parts of the dream road nearly every night as we crossed the Whisper Waste, and his dreams were always strange and terrible. I do not think he had much strength left even before we climbed to the top of the great stone." Minasau looked puzzled. "I knew he had left Azua some time ago, but have you truly traveled so far?" "The road was long and anything but straight. I have stayed at his side these many moons, doing my best to keep him alive and comfortable as I could." I leaned closer. "I am weary too, Lord Protector, but I promise that if you wait until we have found my master a place to lie down, I will answer all your questions." Minasau gave me a strange, shrewd look. "What is your name, servant?" "Pamunkes, my lord. I am Hakatri's armiger." He laughed, more startled than amused. "Of course! I had forgotten about you. Hakatri's Tinukadaya squire." Again the considering look. "Yes, we will speak at greater length, Armiger Pamon, you and I." Full darkness had fallen as we reached the heart of Enkiei Shaoseye, so all I could make out of the fabled place were the strange ways that the forest and the summer city had grown into each other. In many places, the largest trees had been made important parts of the city's buildings. Great beeches, oaks, and hemlocks festooned with platforms and linked by swaying bridges as nearly invisible in the leafy heights as spider webs. Elsewhere, stone buildings had been constructed around natural rocky outcrops in such a way that it was hard to say which parts had been built and which had stood there since the dawn of the world. Everywhere I looked, forest and city seemed to have grown or been woven together into one thing, so that it was nearly impossible to tell what was made by pure nature and what had been crafted by skillful eyes and hands. Not even the dim shadow-haunted passages of Nakiga had seemed as strange to me as Enki-e-Shaoxia did that first evening. While I marveled at the beauty of the place, I was also astonished by how empty it seemed. In the past months I had seen many of the fabled cities of the Zedaya people, Nakiga, Mezutua, and even ruined, nearly deserted Kementari. But it was only in Enki-e-Shaoxia's leaf-canopied streets and public places that I began to wonder whether Inluki might be right, that my master's people were losing their mastery over this world that had received us after the garden's destruction. Golden Leaf House, the chief residence of Minasao's clan, was built with 5 massive lightning oaks as its pillars. A wooden roof had been built between their trunks over the main platform, and 2 more levels stood above that, so that the house's uppermost chambers looked out over the top of the forest. My master, still insensible, was carried to an empty set of chambers. Even as he was set on the bed, healers surrounded him, though how many came to help, and how many simply to stare because of the fame of his person and his battle with the blackworm, I could not guess. I left him in their care and was conducted to a much more modest chamber. Still, I did not have to share it, nor would I have given much joy to anyone seeking company, since immediately after being relieved of my responsibility, I fell into a deep sleep. In that slumber I again felt fiery pain, but this time it was not quite as terrible, and once more I could perceive something of the dream beyond the torment, a glimpse behind the veil. I found myself in a place, a strange place, all darkness and wind, with gleams of light that led me one way, then another, but remained elusive as foxfire. I saw figures around me that were dim and distant at first, but when I tried to catch up to them, drawing close so that I should have been able to see them clearly, they never became more than misty, indistinct shapes. Excuse me. I am dead, I thought. I am Hakatri, I thought. No, I am Kes the servant. But in this dream there seemed little difference between those two things. My master suffered, and I suffered. I floated helplessly in that place of dark fogs and keening voices as wordless as the cries of birds. Then the pain returned, hot as a killing fever, scalding me mercilessly, and I awoke with a sharp cry, my face dripping with sweat. A lone and clearly young Zedaya stood in the doorway, concern written on his face. "You are Pamon Kes?" he asked. I nodded my head, but I was still shocked by the dream. "I was when I lay down." He did not know whether I was making a joke. Neither did I. "Lord Minasao has asked for you," he said. I felt a sudden chill. "How is my master?" "A little better, or at least so I have heard. Come with me now." Relieved, I got up and followed him. I had assumed the young Zedaya would lead me to Hakatri's side, but instead we descended past the main hall and out into the forest garden that surrounded Golden Leaf House, then past several smaller buildings that lined the curving road from the city gate. The streets still seemed almost deserted, and I wondered why. Was it some ritual of the Golden Leaf clan to spend the evening away from its public places? Not even Nakiga had seemed so devoid of residence, though its subjects were imprisoned by countless strictures handed down from Utuku's throne. At last we reached an extremely large oak standing by itself in a clearing, hung with a succession of ladders leading to its upper reaches. I could not climb them with the swift surety of my young guide, but I followed him as best I could. At the top, on a wide platform under a spread of branches thick with leaves, I learned for the first time that my questioning would not be done by Minasao alone. His mother, Tsunoyata no Shenkida, was also waiting for us, dressed in simple but splendid robes of soft coppery cloth. As with many older Zedaya, her age could only be guessed by subtle signs, but I knew that she had guided the folk of the summer city for many great years. Tsunoyata was one of the so-called landborn, the first generation of Hikidaya and Zidaya birthed in these lands after the flight from the garden. She had the same purple hair as her son, swept up and piled high on her head, held in place with pins of lavender bloodwood. Her expression was cool, but not unkind, as her son Minasao presented me. I bowed low to her, then began the 6 songs to show my respect, but she stopped me after the first one with a graceful gesture. "That is salutation enough, Armiger." "Yes, let us not wait on ceremony," said Minasao as I rose to my feet. "Tell us everything that has happened." "My master," I asked, "how is he?" "Sleeping, but he spoke to the healers when he briefly awoke. He knows where he is." I said a silent prayer of thanks to the garden. "That is good to hear, my lord. I will do my best to tell you all you wish to know. First, give the Armiger a bench so he will have some comfort." Lady Tsunoyata's voice was deep, like the lowest notes of a harp. "And bring him something so he can break his fast." The young Zidaya who had led me there hurried out, but returned a short time later with a platter of honey bread and forest fruits. I ate as slowly and politely as I could, though I was nearly starving. Still, half my answers must have come while I was chewing. I did my best to describe everything that had happened since the day the mortal herdsman had come in embassy to Azua. I could not guess why Tsunoyata and her son wanted to know so much about our travels, other than their love for my master and sadness over his afflictions. Of course, they were relatives of Amaterasu and Iunigato, and thus of my master and Lord Inaluki, but that is true for most of the highest families in the 9 cities. They stayed mostly silent as I spoke, though they exchanged many glances, and from time to time they asked me to say more about certain things, especially our time atop Sesuadra. To my surprise, though, the things they seemed most interested in were not that strange interlude, or the fight with the dragon, or even our time with Zaniko the exile, who seemed to fascinate everyone else we meet, but our journey to Nakiga and the doings of my master's brother during that time. "Tell me again what you recall of that first day inside the mountain," Minasao asked me. "You said Inaluki met first with High Celebrant Hiki, and you also mentioned Lord Yedade. Do you recall the names of any others?" I shook my head. "I stayed mostly by Hakatri's side, as I told you. Many of Queen Utuku's advisors came to us. They went in and out of my master's chamber like priests going to prayers. But I understand that Lord Inaluki met with Queen Utuku herself." The questions about Nakiga went on for some time, but at last the Zidaya allowed me to tell the rest of my tale, ending with our trip across the grasslands and our arrival at Enkie Shaosaye's gate. After I had finished, we all sat for a while in silence, though it seemed to me that Minasao and his mother were able to come to agreement about something even without speaking. They thanked me. Then the young Zidaya who had brought me led me back to Golden Leaf House. And I am going to stop there because we start a whole new section if I don't. And it is now 8 o'clock. So with that, I will wrap it up, assuming that I stayed online all that time, but I think I did. All right, looks like it all worked out. Oh, and there's a new person, Homailson Lopez Pastos. Thanks from Brazil. Well, thank you, and nice to see you. Anyway, so I am going to wrap it up for the night here. As I said, I will be back next week, which I think is the 3rd of September. So I will, unless something really weird happens, I will be doing all my normal stuff, in terms of 1 a.m. Sunday morning, 7 p.m. Sunday night. And then, as I said before, I think I'm going to be off for 3 weeks because we're going out of town and going to England. So that's where I'm at. And with that, I hope that you are where you should be at. And I will see you next week. And again, as I always do, I thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to spend time with you. And I'm always pleased to have readers. And I'm even more pleased to have readers who get into touch with me in some way, shape, or form. It's always good. So I love seeing from people and getting questions and, getting to read to you. It's a real pleasure. So, peace. Take good care of yourselves, your loved ones, your friends and neighbors, and we will all help to take care of each other, and that way we will all do better than if we were on our own. And that's how it works, folks. We humans are social animals. Anyway, I'm sure you are all social animals too, so you don't need to have that explained to you. I will see you very soon. Good night.